Welcome, Dr. Chappell. Now, he has a lot to say. He's going to have 15 minutes, and I'm going to keep track of that, and you may go over like a minute or two, but because we got started late, we're going to try and stick to the time frame, okay?
I can see she has me on a short leash, so you folks are going to have to bear with me as we go through a number of things here. I really appreciate that introduction. I didn't expect it to be that long, I'm sorry. But when you start teaching in 1963 and you carry on for another 50 years or so, you've got a few things under your belt. And those of you who have been in that position, you know what I'm talking about. I started actually here in California, teaching at San Fernando High School, out in the end of the valley. I think some of you know where that is. We lived in Van Nuys. I came out from KU where I finished in biology and chemistry and started teaching the kids there and sophomores and juniors in high school. And they didn't want to learn science. They didn't care much about science. They just didn't want to, give me a D and let me get on. You know, we'll just do the promotion thing. And I said, well, look, we've got a little simple contract here. I'm going to come today, every day, prepared to teach. I want you here every day, prepared to learn. It's a simple contract. And, of course, a lot of them didn't understand that. They came with no assignments completed. They didn't want to prepare for tests. And sure enough, we had a whole bunch of them actually fail the first 9 weeks. Now, by the end of the school year, we had it reversed so that 80% of the kids actually had earned an A or a B. I said earned an A or a B. Now, that was long before Common Core. It had nothing to do with national standards. It had nothing to do with saying, well, we've got to have rigor. Well, we've had rigor ever since time began. Anytime you have a teacher and a student, that teacher's probing and asking that student to excel, to think, to ask questions, not just keep answering the questions that the kids raise, but ask them, what would you do? What is your solution? How would you handle that problem? Same way with critical thinking. Somehow or another, this nation put a man on the moon. I don't know how they did that without some critical thinking or without Common Core. My gosh, how did that happen? How do we get the assumption that this is reform when for so many years we have been teaching our kids English and math and doing it extremely well? We have so many companies that have created all kinds of technology and software and investments and banking. We're the leaders in the world. And somehow we got it right. It's not rocket science. So as I sat on the State Board of Education in Kansas, I realized that we're part of a pond in a big scheme. And it's very interesting to say, wait a minute, how did we get here? Why is it that very few of the elected officials, such as myself, sitting on the State Board of Education, or the legislators in our state and other states, didn't know what was coming down the pike? Now, you assume when you elect somebody that they're there to make decisions. And for some reason, we didn't know about a lot of this stuff till it's already hit us. We're already committed by our staff. The staff, the bureaucrats in Washington and in the State Departments, all made their decisions way before we ever got around to it. Now, by way of introduction, I'd like to find out how many of you folks are teachers in this room right now. Anybody? Wonderful. That's great. Thank you for being here. Coming from a background, as you heard, of teachers, I have tremendous respect for teachers. This is not about teachers don't know what they're doing. This is about let's give teachers respect. Let's give them what they have worked for every single day, taking care of our kids and doing the best job they possibly can. And what I see about Common Core is it's a way to browbeat teachers. It says we're going to use a test called the Smarter Balance, and we're going to say, by God, if those kids in your school don't get a high enough grade, we're going to say every teacher in the school must be bad, based on one test that, by the way, isn't valid or reliable. Smarter Balance or PARC, either one of those tests that they're trying to develop, have not been validated. They are not reliably able to tell us whether the kids have learned what the teachers have taught them. Now, that's a big issue. Common Core is not just standards, but it's also the way in which they're asking teachers to teach. They want to tell you how to teach math and how to teach reading. And they're doing that by way of the various vendors, if you will, the publishers of the textbooks and the materials. If they are going to sell you something new, it has to say on the cover 100% aligned to Common Core. Isn't that right? So then the curriculum directors say, well, it must be good. It says it's 100% aligned. We're supposed to implement Common Core, so okay, let's go for this. Let's put this in front of our kids. And there's no evidence that Common Core is able to do a better job of teaching our kids than what we currently had. In California, you have good standards since 97? In Kansas, we did ours every 7 years. Our standards were higher than what Common Core is now. And my gosh, when you ask people to adopt something that you've never tested, even a pilot study, and you want to make claims, it's more rigorous, it's more critical thinking, it's better, we're going to have every kid ready for college and career. How do you possibly get various hundreds of careers taught when you've got a curriculum that's basically a college-bound curriculum? And every career has a variety of different ways it uses math and applies it to the solutions they have to come up with. So the claims are bogus. I'm just an old farm kid, I'm sorry. I grew up in Kansas, we just kind of speak plain. In front of you have 3 documents. Hopefully everybody's got one. Do you all have 3 documents? The first says at the top, and now for the rest of the story. If you don't have one, raise your hand. There's some people around here to pass out. Many of you remember the old guy, his name was Paul Harvey. Huh? He'd always lead with a story, and then he'd say, and now for the rest of the story. Okay? So to make this as simple as I could, I put this together as claims on the left side and the facts on the right. And put it in simple English. When I came tonight, I was given a document that's been put out by your State Department of Education. This document here is the same document we have in Kansas, in Missouri, in Nebraska. Everybody is singing off the same song sheet. It's not even close to accurate. So why would we do that? Well, you have a problem. This document right here, and I like to read from what's actually been agreed to. This was signed by our commissioner, and same was happening in California, other states around the nation, back in 2009. This thing is not new. It started under Bush. The bureaucrats then had a concept of national standards. In fact, national standards have been a big push for about a decade. And so now that you've got a bunch of folks wanting to have a piece of the $4.3 billion in Race to the Top money, they had the big carrot laid out here and says, okay, if you states want a piece of this apple, we're going to give you a chance to get that bite you want to build up your deficit. Remember that 2008 recession we had? All right, states in 2009 were desperate. They said, well, God, how are we going to fund our schools? We need some more money. How are we going to get that? So Arnie Duncan had $4.3 billion of our dollars to play with. And back in 2009, they already had these things in the agreement. Now, bear with me. I like to be able to read it from the document itself. I don't want you to feel like I'm making this stuff up. Remember now, we're elected officials. This came to us in a board meeting, and they said, oh, by the way, the governor, in this case the commissioner, had signed a document saying, we're going to cooperate in the development of Common Core standards. Now, our board and every other board in the nation didn't know what that meant. We had never seen the Common Core, didn't know what they were talking about, didn't know. Okay, they said, well, we'll get back to you. All right, if you don't vote on something, you don't see it to vote on, you can't study it, how are you supposed to make a wise decision? So here we are on page 3, it's talking about the federal role. Remember they keep saying this is all state-led? State-led, right? That's supposed to make it right. It wasn't the feds taking over our schools, it was the states. Okay. Now it says here the federal role is the government shall provide financial support for this effort in developing the Common Core state standards and moving towards common assessments such as through the Race to the Top funds. That, by the way, is $360 million for the two consortia to develop the state assessments. And, of course, that $4.3 billion that they held out as a big carrot for schools to come along and be able to apply for. Further, the federal government can incentivize this effort through a range of tiered incentives. I don't know about you, that's a polite way of saying we're going to coerce, we're going to blackmail, we're going to intimidate, we're going to say, if you don't do this our way, you've got big problems with us, whatever that was. We didn't know what that was. A lot of straw men, but no facts to go by. But the incentivize is to say, all right, we're going to then give greater flexibility in the use of existing federal funds. Now, those of you as educators in this room know what I'm talking about, because they called the No Child Left Behind flexibility waivers, didn't they? Flexibility waivers. Our state and every other state, California, by the way, is conditional. Kansas is also conditional, of whether you're going to get a waiver. And I'm thanking California leaders for standing tall and saying, no, we're not going to agree to everything you want us to do. If you think we're supposed to do that, forget it. But the idea of the flexibility waiver is you have 40 specific things, strings attached to that agreement. It's over 300 pages of document between the agency and the federal bureaucrats. And I'm talking about only a handful of bureaucrats. There's 5, maybe 10 at the most in Arne Duncan's staff that are really pulling these strings. And at least 3 of those people were appointed and brought into his agency from Bill Gates Foundation. Now that's a conflict of interest. And they went through the back door to try to make sure those people got hired and put on his staff to be able to approve the race to the top applications and come up with these criteria for the flexibility waivers. But the next thing it says now, we're going to revise the state accountability structure and offering financial support for the states and long-term financial support of development of Common Core standards. Didn't they just say in these, they said, no, this is state-led, right? Here right now it's saying the long-term financial support for the development of common assessments and standards. That's in 2009. We as a state board never saw the Common Core standards to even look at, to vote on, until 2010, September of 2010. Now remember that date in just a minute. The final thing it says, and finally the federal government can revise and align existing federal education laws. And what they did was they changed the Privacy Act that protects your child's data. It's called FERPA. They did that change in the 2011, December of 2011. It went into effect in 2012.
Doctor, you have 3 minutes.
We have a situation going where you have now, back in 2009, the game plan's already in place. And you think you as teachers don't know, as parents you don't know, we as elected officials didn't know what was coming down the pipe. Now we have one other document I'm going to hit on very quickly, and we'll get back to this as we get into our question and answers. But this document right here is the agreement between the states and Smarter Balance. By the way, that's the one that your state right now is trying to divide. We're going to do just reading or math, not both. And thank goodness you're doing that, because this is a big pilot project, basically an experiment, right? This is an experiment using our kids as guinea pigs. This document in the first paragraph is between the states and Smarter Balance, and it says, the purpose of this agreement is to establish a framework of collaboration for states in supporting assessment of common standards. Now let me point out to you, this was signed in January of 2010. The boards did not see to even read the standards until like June or July of 2010. In our case in Kansas, we didn't vote on them until October. 10 months later, our board actually got a chance to vote and discuss the Common Core. The commissioner had already signed us up to not only the standards, but also the assessments. So if you wonder why there's a confusion going on, there's a lot of reason for that. And parents all over the nation, this is one of hundreds of meetings that are going on in almost every state. In New York, Louisiana. In Louisiana, just 2 weeks ago, they had a group, many more people than in this group right here today. that came in and says, hey, we want out, and their board voted 14-0. 14-0 to get them out of Common Core.
Thank you, Dr. Chappell.